The world's insects are hurtling down the path to extinction, threatening a catastrophic collapse of nature's ecosystems, according to the first global scientific review. More than 40% of insect species are declining, and a third are endangered, the analysis found. How does climate change affect the extinction of insects?
A 2019 study showed in a very worrisome and alarming way that we being the planet, are losing 2.4% insect biomass every year. So that means that we are on track that certainly within the next 100 years, assuming that does not accelerate, which right now would be a false assumption, but assuming that was a steady rate of loss each year, within 100 years we would have very little insect population left on the planet. And that, by definition, that alone means no humans. We can't, given the role insects play in a functional ecosystem, i.e. you cannot have a functional ecosystem without insects, humans simply won't exist. So that is an extremely worrisome thing. Alarm bells should be sounding when we talk about what's happening to the insect population on the planet.
Scientists have published more than 230 peer-reviewed studies looking at weather events around the world, from Hurricane Katrina to Russia's 2010 heat wave. The result is mounting evidence that human activity is raising the risk of some types of extreme weather, especially those linked to heat. Carbon Brief analysis suggests 68% of all extreme weather events studied to date were made more likely or more severe by human-caused climate change. You've mentioned some of these before. Can you expand on how climate change affects extreme weather events?
Well, let's take hurricanes, for example. How climate change affects hurricanes is that you have a warmer ocean than you would without it, and that's going to amp up the strength of the hurricane and contribute to wind speeds. And then that same warmer ocean means there's going to be more moisture evaporating, also alongside a warmer atmosphere. And that's going to pull that much more moisture up, so there are going to be increasingly severe rain events associated with these increasingly more powerful, stronger hurricanes. Also, if you look at Hurricane Katrina, for example, it was a Category 3, but it was so broad. If you look at the satellite images of that hurricane, which are easy to find online, by the time it hit New Orleans, it encompassed a vast swath of the entire Gulf of Mexico. So it was pushing a storm surge of water of up to 21, 22 feet that normally is associated with a Category 5 hurricane. So that's why also in the last year, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration was talking about possibly needing to generate a Category 6, which right now the scale only goes to 5, but literally create a whole new category for hurricanes because primarily of climate change, because the amount of rainfall that they're carrying now that we haven't seen before, the storm surges, and absolutely how massive the storms are. So that's one example how climate change is really amping up extreme weather events. So we've always had these extreme weather events, but now they're happening on a scale that we haven't seen before and more consistently.
What are the most important steps we can take to stop climate change, and what does the government need to do? What can individuals do?
From my perspective of writing about this crisis from all the different aspects for a long time, I understand fully that we're way past the point of no return. By that, I mean we're not going to stop it. We're not going to change it. The best case scenario is maybe there'd be some mitigation, but the primary, I think, thing that all of us should focus on now is adaptation, that learning to live on a irrevocably changed planet, that there's not going to, renewable technology is not going to save us, the Green New Deal is not going to save us, that we don't have time, thinking that we have 10 years or 12 years to avert the worst impacts. I say that that's a pipe dream because if you look at the global political system and the global fossil fuel-based economy, there is nothing to indicate that any government on the planet is going to react in the way that it would have to react to cause serious mitigation. And by serious mitigation, I mean literally in a matter of single-digit years, getting completely off a fossil fuel-based economy, shifting over to renewables, dramatically reducing travel down to the point of essentially almost no air travel within less than a decade. I'm talking these kinds of changes on a global scale to cause the kind of mitigation, i.e., stop emitting CO2 at the level we are, which, by the way, PS 2019 was another record year of CO2 emissions for the planet. And there's nothing to indicate that that's going to happen this year, next year, within the next 5 years. So while we have some countries talking about, okay, by 2030, we'll have CO2 emissions back down to 1990 levels or this kind of thing, that's certainly a step in the right direction. It's absolutely the moral thing to do. But let's not kid ourselves and act as though, oh, that's going to really generate mitigation, because that's a drop in the bucket. So that leaves it upon each of us to take a very clear, sober, honest assessment of, this is where we are on the history of this planet. Now, what am I going to do? And one way I like to talk about the imperative of it is that let's pretend that we're on our deathbeds, and however old we are, fast forward, pretend you're on your deathbed, assuming you have a long life, and then a child comes up and says, wow, you were alive in 2020 and there was still summer sea ice in the Arctic, and we still had the western Antarctic ice sheet, and we still had the Amazon for the most part, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Did you know that there was a planetary climate crisis? And of course, we'd have to say yes, because anyone alive today has to know about it, at least cursorily. And then that begs the next question is, what did you do? And I think that's a question that we need to be asking ourselves right now, because it's a very personal, individual question that each one of us has to then think about. How would I want to be able to answer that question? Because I think the question leaves open basically the moral obligation for some pretty radical actions to be taken.